Hi, folks. So Animal Think Tank, we have sort of three areas of work. We're not public-facing. We're not a campaigning organisation. I guess we think a lot about movement strategy and try to support the movement be more effective. And at the moment, we've kind of got three main areas of work. I guess the most public-facing one, and the one that people know us for, is sort of narrative strategy, messaging, effectiveness around messaging. The one that's probably most central to Animal Think Tank is our legal and legislative work and our interest in what is the equivalent of achieving human rights for animals, whether that's in 35 years or 350 years. So that's something that, we spend a lot of time on. And then sort of the third area of our work is supporting the movement build a comprehensive ecosystem and infrastructure. So that's one that's kind of newish for us and on the up. So I'm not going to give you a recipe book for fitting strategies together. This is not going to fix everything. Here's one way to do it. What I'm going to do is just give you some frameworks that I find helpful when I'm thinking about where our movement's going, who to work with, how to work with them, where to dedicate our resource. And I guess is why, lots of parts of public society, civic society, corporate world don't collaborate, and that's just fine. But something an MP said to me, and I know he said at least to Sam in the audience, he probably says to everybody, Adrian Ramsey, a Green MP who's, probably one of the most supportive MPs for animal rights. So 4 or 5 months ago, said, well, the thing is, there's 100 animal rights organisations in the country? And you've all got, 3 demands on average, 3 campaigns going? So I've got 300 worths of demands banging up my door, going, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. And it's I just haven't got the time for that. I need 3 or 4. So I had a lot of empathy for Adrian in that moment, seeing things from his position, he's trying to be really, really proactive in Parliament, and basically overwhelmed, I guess, with all the asks from all our organisations. And then at a similar time, I had a conversation with my sister. I grew up on an animal farm. My dad's got 4 kids, 3 of us are vegan, and 1 of us is not, and that's my sister, and she's, your classic anti-vegan. But occasionally I'm brave enough to have a conversation with her about what I do. My other brother isn't. He also runs an animal rights organisation. Poor dad. So I kind of said, I can't remember my question, but it was roughly well, what do you make of the animal rights movement? And she just straight off the bat kind of said, it's just all so overwhelming, Mark. It's you're asking this and this and this. And, well, I just don't know. Oh, it was a stress. Yeah. I just don't know what to do. So I just don't do anything. I just shut down. And although I struggle generally talk animal stuff with my sister, I also had empathy for it in that moment, and I could really see, to us, it's bloody obvious, isn't it, what to do? Well, when you can start going vegan, Sean. But I could see in that context of that conversation, it's just oh yeah, she's seeing all of these different campaigns asks, and she's got a complex life like everybody, trying to survive with a mortgage and too much stress and everything, and there's only a little bit of attention available for doing something, and it's just I don't know what to do, so I won't do anything. So I can see some value in this as a movement, sort of coalescing around what we're trying to do, what we're asking for. Another motivation is that most successful movements say the first milestone of any movement is to unite. And I guess the contemporary pushers of that message are Otpor or Canva, as they became a training organisation. So they won the sort of Serbian revolution, and that was their first milestone in their strategic plan, is unite the opposition or unite the movement against Milosevic, the dictator. Now, that's not always the case. So Evan Wolfson, who led the Freedom to Marry campaign in the United States, he was just like, you're never going to persuade anyone to join you, Mark. I couldn't persuade anyone. Just get on. Just get on and do it. And if you're successful, they'll join you. And we really celebrate Freedom to Marry as kind of obvious. But Evan couldn't get anyone to join him at the start of that movement. Everybody thought it was ridiculous that in the United States there was no way they were going to get a law for freedom to marry. So it was too bold, it's too ambitious, you're making us look bad, it's too extreme, we need to go for small asks. So the biggest LGBT organisation in the US at the time, they never joined the Freedom to Marry movement. Even the day before they won in the Supreme Court, they'd still not joined. And they'd been arguing for some really small bit of legislative change. I can't remember what it was, but like being able to visit somebody in a hospital if you're in a gay couple. And they still haven't won that piece of legislation, 10 years after Freedom to Marry was won. So, yeah, case for being bold, but also, there are two different approaches, I guess, to unifying, like sit in a room together, bash your heads together over a couple of months and agree something, or just get on and do it, and hopefully people will join you. There are challenges. So sometimes organisations come to Animal Think Tank for a sounding board on strategy. And something really struck me. I don't know, it was probably like November or December. So it was one of the major organisations were asking me what I thought of their new strategic plan. And, as they explained it to me, the first thing they said was, we've got a new strategic plan, we're following these 3 campaigns, because what we are trying to do is differentiate ourselves from the other organisations so that we can demonstrate value and benefit to our donors and our members. And I was just like, this is why the movement's, or one of the reasons the movement is fragmented. And I'm like, that's totally a legit reason, isn't it? I totally understand where that's coming from. I don't know whether that's necessarily true. Like, I could imagine if you are, your membership base and your donors would be perfectly happy if you're saying, we're working on the same campaign that everybody else is working on, and this is the contribution that we're going to make to that campaign. But yeah, I hope for me, working together is about mutual benefit, and it's about alignment, not necessarily signing a memorandum of understanding and a sort of contract or something. It's not sitting down and bashing out, you've got the same strategy. It's kind of like knowing what other people are doing and aligning yourself given that information. So who might you be working with? So for a long time I resisted this. This is me trying to make sense of the movement and all the different components. I was just like, why are you wasting your time trying to do this? And quite often it'd be the thing I'd do on a Sunday morning with my notepad and scribbling. I even thought I was wasting my Sunday morning doing this. And I did sort of have a ha-ha moment about a month ago, where I realised, by understanding the movement and what constitutes the movement, then that helps me understand who I might work with and how I might work with them. So this is an unfinished, it's a very, well, maybe not first draft, but a third draft with 1 or 2 more to go. I think there's a lot more complexity to be brought to this. But this is kind of from my perspective, understanding the movement. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but up here at the top I've got welfare, and that's not how we often these days talk about welfare, like kind of more the EA incremental change. That's the old welfare world. What 200 years ago people were trying to do is just treat animals better before they got killed. So for me, this is the biggest part of the movement. And that's because most people in the UK are welfareists. And we might be all down here. But loads of the money that's going into legacy organisations like Animal Aid, League Against Cruel Sport, I'm thinking maybe even Humane World for Animals, is actually coming from meat eaters who are against a lot of the cruel practices that are taking place. So for me, that's a big part of the movement we can be working with. We're interested in institutionalising rights and sentient governance. So that's sentient governance is like bringing, at the moment we talk about governance, like UK government, and that's humans, and it's about bringing sentience or all sentience into our government structures, our state structures, our democratic systems. And institutionalising rights is about getting the rights concrete into law. And again, maybe controversially, I've put welfare reform together with end cruel practices, and I've called them the abolitionist welfare reformists. So people with an intentional end goal of ending it all, so differentiate. So academics call this new welfare and that old welfare. And for me, a lot of the end cruel practices, which often are talked about as rights, like we all talk about animal rights all the time, but what do we actually mean? Well, a lot of the time we don't mean animal rights. What we mean is the freedom that animals would gain from certain things being banned, and that's not necessarily a legal right. And then most of these, I think, are self-explanatory. This is where I came from, the liberatory movement. So like the anarchist movement, that was kind of where I was like for 15 years. Like sort of more ALF type stuff. That's basically solutions that don't involve the state. And not involving the law, but trying to change society. So there's still a small segment working on that. So I thought I'd do them justice by including them. So some of you will know this framework. We kind of roll it out in lots of our sessions. Might be new to others. This is one of our foundational frameworks. It comes from the INI Institute in Boston. So this is led by Carlos Saavedra, who was the lead behind the DREAM Act that happened in Obama's era, sort of given, I think it was about 15 million children of undocumented immigrants access to the university system, or enough documentation so they could access the university system. And he's since gone on to build a training institute that has worked, kind of helped found the Sunrise Movement, worked a lot with If Not Now, Black Lives Matter, and kind of virtually any social movement the US has had in the last 15 years. So we find this really helpful for kind of diffusing tension. That we're not always in alignment or agreement with the tactics or the campaigns of other organisations. So what this is a framework that looks at what are the components of successful movements. And where they've got to is you kind of need at least some of each of these elements depend on the sort of type of objective you've got. So almost all successful movements have got this in them. So there's some mass protest. So that's, the people who are making us look bad. That's where I've been most of my life. And their role is what sometimes gets called the bad cop. Or it's about building power that other players in the movement can kind of leverage with politicians or institutions. But the primary role of mass protest is to change how the public think and talk. So it's building narrative power. So it's generating newsworthy stuff that people talk about, and over time can then change their perspective and how they relate to a movement. There's just hundreds and hundreds of books kind of on the tactics of that, though I could go into. Structure organising is kind of the boring bit that everybody pays little attention to, but can be like really, really fundamental. So it's like the most successful form of structured organising tends to be grassroots with some professional staff. So trade unions are like a membership-based organisation. That's probably like one of the most successful. We're going back to Freedom to Marry campaign. So they lend very, very heavily on structured organising, even though it doesn't get talked about a lot. It's like, we'll celebrate all these big wins. But just for one vote in Massachusetts, so the Senate of Massachusetts were having to vote whether to allow a referendum or not on whether the people of Massachusetts supported gay marriage. And across a 2-year period, they mobilized, I don't know how many hundreds of people to go door knocking, to have kind of anything from like 10-minute to 1 hour deep canvassing conversations with people on their doorsteps. And they had 25,000 doorstep conversations for one campaign in one state that comprised the freedom to marry. So there's a lot of legwork that we can miss. Inside game is leveraging power, so that tends to be working with people on the inside, power on the inside, processes that you can use from the inside, so like strategic litigation that the last talk was covering. That's like a process of the inside. And so a lot of like the bigger organizations are kind of well placed, building relationships with institutional players, whether it's staff in DEFRA or whether it's with politicians. There's a lot of personal transformation in our movement, kind of vegan outreach, diet change, behavior change, and then alternatives. So you might think about alternative meat, and that is one alternative. So this framework normally thinks of alternatives as subcultures. So it's like, where is the space that is kind of giving you your North Star of the type of society you want to arrive at? So for us, there's two clear spaces. There's sanctuaries that you could say are prefiguring human-animal relations. And there's also, you might have seen the Vegan Organic Network and how we can farm in a vegan organic way. So I'd kind of argue they're an alternative that are kind of leading a possible future ideal. So the value of the framework is kind of saying, like, you need everyone. And even if you've got very different tactics or very different positions or different strategies, like, everybody's kind of probably potentially playing their part. Not necessarily well. So there might be a lot of room for improving the inside game, or improving how we do vegan outreach, or improving how we do protest. But there's a potential role. So there's a difference between, like, are you doing the right thing, and are you doing it well? And we often tend to judge strategy on how well is it being done, and quite often that's not being done very well. Rather than like, but yeah, is it actually the right strategy and objective to be pursuing? Yeah, so the idea hopefully is this. I mean, we found, like, we've sort of peddled this around the UK quite a lot, that hopefully it brings down infighting in the movement by understanding. I might not like them, I might not agree with them, but I can maybe see there's some legitimacy in what they're doing. A different framework. Again, it was kind of one like, what, Mark, why are you spending all your time doing this? And I think it's to understand how, like, different parts of the work that we could be doing fit together, and which ones to choose to do or to leave for others. So, I mean, our interest is in law and politics. and then in narrative, belief and ideology. So I'm going to quickly run through this. And this might be right or wrong, but hopefully it might be helpful. I find it's helpful to me. So you've got individuals and individual behaviour as kind of, well, what influences them? It was like the networks around them, including their families. And the communities and subcultures that those families and social networks are in influence them. And that these are influenced by society. And that includes our kind of corporate and civic institutions. And so this is kind of all a society here. And we have what, get called pillars of support. So pillars of support are what prop up the existing system. So that's like the veterinary profession, the judiciary system, DEFRA, Parliament, you could go on and on and on. And all of that's, state structure is influenced by the economy, what would get signed off, and the food system we're in, which is influenced by law and politics, influenced by culture and society. And like fundamentally everything is about, well, what are the values that are subconsciously in our heads? Like what's the common sense that pervades society? And that these are all dynamic, they're all kind of influencing one another, and so you can intervene at any level. So like we're trying to intervene at these two levels, other organisations are intervening maybe here and here. But the potential value is, well, for me, I suppose I was experienced talking to lots of organisations and individuals, like what we're up against is so overwhelming that can provoke kind of a lot of psychodynamic responses. So it can provoke anxiety, and then to resolve our anxiety, we push that anxiety out and we blame others. And those others that we might blame are other organisations. And if only they weren't doing it that way, then everything would be all right. So for me, it's kind of like breaking down the problem a bit and helping me think, well, okay, so this is my part, and I'm going to leave the rest to others. And it also kind of like, I think quite often like we might come up against something and then realise, okay, so we're struggling because there's an element that needs to be taken care of elsewhere. So like for me, like the real obvious gap is like not many of us think about the economy. So if we're going to have a transition of anything, including like more plant-based food, then how do we transition to that economy? And it's basically like, you can't get any legislation through at the moment. I mean, this is a mandating government, unless it's cost neutral, like to the economy. So yeah, that's an area of work that maybe lots of us could potentially be coming up against because we're kind of not dedicating enough resource and thinking to that. I'm starting to realise the impact of having 45 minutes rather than 60. So yeah, you need to I'll skip maybe more slides than I was planning to. Yeah, you kind of need strategy, narrative strategy, and organising across all those spheres. And then there's, I suppose, a complexity. Some of you might realise, so if you do narrative work, well, any element of the INI model could do narrative work. So you could have outside game playing, inside game playing, alternatives doing narrative work. And that's the same for all of them. So you start building a matrix across these. So this is a strategy framework that we really find helpful. And so we sort of organically found it helpful that, as we talk to other organisations about what we're up to and show them this, then they can plug theirs in and then they can see how they fit in with us, or they start kind of reconfiguring how they think about strategy. So I'm going to be quite quick on this. It comes from the International Centre for Nonviolent Conflict, based in Washington. It's been going a long time. They might have renamed it, because I pulled the graphic off the web and I can see they stuck an S in here. So it used to be called Grand Objective Strategic Milestones. And it's basically, you can break down what you're trying to achieve into like one grand objective that's like concrete and tangible. So maybe a piece of policy or a piece of legislation, or a win in court or something. And then you'll have milestones that have phases. So a grand strategic objective might take like 80 years, or it might take 35 years or 15 years to achieve. And the phases, then you might have generally 3 or 4, some only have 2. So generally thinking about 5 to 15 years for achieving a milestone. So again, that's normally quite tangible, a policy win, a legislative win. But it could also be, so one of the freedom to marry milestones was hitting 65% of support in the American population for gay marriage. And so it was a narrative milestone. And then for each milestone or phase, you've got lots of campaigns going on. So like, well, I'll stick with freedom to marry. Like you might be running campaigns both in the courts in Massachusetts, but then also like maybe in the Senate or the lower house. And then you might be doing that in like 15 states in the US. And then you've got your sort of tactics and action cycles down here. So this is kind of where most of us start, thinking about tactics. And this is where most of us disagree. There's actually much less disagreement the further you go up. So kind of working together is often focusing on, not on your tactics, but focusing on your very long-term objective, your strategic milestones, or potentially your campaigns. And you can often get agreement here. And there's even a lot of international agreement on big UN resolutions up at these levels. And then there's no kind of agreements down more in the detail. I think, so for me, that's kind of quite an important thing. It's like we often see organizations through the lens of what's in our social media feed on them, and we might not like it. And very often it's because we're looking at it through the lens of our theory of change and not their theory of change. And maybe in their theory of change, it makes total sense what they're doing, but we just don't know the theory of why they're doing it that way and how it might be having impact, positive impact. So then we normally just think it's rubbish and they're doing the wrong thing and doing it badly. I'm just finding where I am. A big opportunity for working together is narrative unity. So some of you will know that we kind of push for fundamental narratives in our movement. So we found that currently the movement in the UK uses about 12 narratives and about 86 messages associated with those narratives. They're all different. So that's kind of like where my sister's going. I don't know what you want from me. It's all so overwhelming. So we found these are kind of more persuasive as messaging strategies. So we've been taking advice from Hathaway Communication that were the kind of big thinkers behind the Freedom to Marry narrative strategy. And so they were like, oh, build narrative unity. Like that's, one of your first or second milestones. And I misinterpreted that originally. And I just thought, oh, we've got to get everybody kind of almost like signing that memorandum of understanding. It's like, yeah, we're going to use these 4. And I was like, it's going to be really hard. We ran a workshop that a couple of you were at in November. And something I learned there was, narrative unity is not everybody saying the same thing. It's more like narrative alignment. And I realized that if you are chasing welfare improvements, you could use animal abilities, or you could draw on the narrative of animal abilities in the messaging that you're doing. But also if you're doing open rescue or ALF stuff, you can draw on animal abilities. And that's the same for all of them. So you can so narrative is kind of like an anchor. You probably can do this better than me at this point, Jane. There should be enough workshops, more than me. It's kind of like an anchor, I guess, and then you can have lots of different maybe messages, but they're all kind of like in what's happening subconsciously in people's minds as you're kind of triggering, oh, animals have abilities. And that might be something you agree with, and it might be something that persuades you. So as I said, like there's kind of 86 of these that the movement's currently using. We could, we keep pushing this to everybody. You could draw on these. So Rob, our researcher, like he often frets, it's like, what if we found the wrong ones? What if I got it wrong? And I'm just like, Rob, it doesn't matter. At the moment, we're using 86 and we've got no evidence for any of them. And here's 4 that at least, we know aren't going to do damage. And actually, the main value of these is not necessarily that they will be more effective. It's just like if we're only saying 4 things, or we're only drawing on 4 things, then people are going to hear that over and over and over again. So there's the repeat factor. So we're going to have more success in our message. So I think quite often we might think a message has impact in, like one message has an impact, but actually the message is about over 2 years or over 10 years. How does it change? So like that's strategic communication, is thinking about how do we change people's minds over 10 or 15 years. So a bit like, we all know Coca-Cola, don't we? Like nobody needs telling Coca-Cola exists, but they're always bombarding us with advertising. And what they're doing is pervasion. It's making sure it's constantly kept at the front of our minds, so that when we go into a shop and we see 20 brands, the Coca-Cola brand will register with us and land and be more persuasive, so we're more likely to buy it. So yeah, another area of sort of being strategically aligned. I'm going to come on to maybe the more difficult stuff. How do we collaborate? So when I first came into the movement, I sort of talked to a lot of different people in the movement and talked to some about how much collaboration was going on, and there's quite little when I came into the movement to think that that's really changed. And I talked to Abby Penny, so we're talking about 10 years ago, about the lack of collaboration, and she said, I thought it was really insightful. She said, maybe we just don't know what collaboration looks like, and that kind of really landed with me. So I've been trying to work out a bit, like, what does collaboration with other organisations look like, and we do try to support that a bit in our work. So a framework I'm going to just share, that collaboration is hard. Yeah, really, really hard across organisations. So when we're in a space together, we're operating at many realms. So you're operating at in a personal realm or just personal level. So your personal objectives. So like, I suppose I want to survive giving a talk. And I'm also starting to feel a bit hot. So that's going on in my mind. And I'm thirsty. And I don't like holding a microphone. So that's all going on in my head. So I'm operating at a personal level. Thank you. We're then also operating at a relational level. So how are you and me? I'm thinking about how you and me are, how our relationship is evolving, developing. What are you thinking about me? How are you perceiving me? If I say this, then it'll have this impact. So I really want to say this, but then if I say it, maybe you think less of me, so I won't say it. Or maybe I'm generating conflict, or maybe I'm generating support, or lots of other things. So that probably dominates most of us in a collaboration space when we're like trying to design organizational strategy together. We're then, like if we doing what we're supposed to be doing, operating at an organisational level, trying to help our organisation achieve its organisational goals. But then we're in a room with people who are competing for the same funding as us. So there are things that we reveal, not reveal, agree to, not agree to. And like you might say that, well, that's wrong, because we're here for the animals. But then it's kind of like, if you don't look after your organisational objectives, then your organisation might not exist anymore. So there is a legitimacy to that. There's then operating at a movement level, what is best for the movement. And then what the INI Institute talk about is operating at a tradition level, which is intergenerational, which is leaving an infrastructure behind for the next generation of the movement. I'm going to be cheeky and kind of like use a bit of it, like we said we would. So I've got my eye on the clock. And then there's the dark side to all of that. There's our shadows and our hidden agendas, the things that's going on in our subconscious that we're not revealing. That I might have a personal agenda, but then my psychology will make me be doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things that are not necessarily right, and I don't even know about it, like I'm protecting myself. And we can do that at a relational, organisation, and a movement level. So I think it's just, for me, being in a inter-org space, it's just helpful to be just aware of that framework and to be thinking, oh, where's this person coming from? And yeah, that's legit. Or it's, I understand why that might be going on for them. I'm going to skip one. Another area where I'm kind of like becoming more and more passionate about where we could collaborate as a movement together, and that's building movement infrastructure. So that's building things that can help all of our organizations. So we get some of that, like we've got, there's the lawyers in the US who kind of provide legal services to, draft your mem in arts or something. We've got people who will do graphic design. We've got some people who will do build a website for you. So they're kind of service level infrastructure. So I'm kind of more interested in power level infrastructure. So centres that are discussing legal theory. So that's the Cambridge Centre for Animal Law, telling us what are the ins and outs of the end goal that we're trying to get to. And then we could have a formal or informal group that's like thinking through strategic litigation. So we haven't yet got that. So in the US Black Power movement, like they put loads and loads of resource into that. So I'll share. I'm getting the 5 minutes thing, so I'll share that and you'll read it. But yeah, so this is a place which is hard because this costs money to send people to spaces to fight for building infrastructure. So like organisations kind of have to make that choice. So when you're resource constrained on campaigning, it's like you don't do it. It's kind of like unless we do it, then we're always kind of going to be we're not going to have the foundations, I guess, for the movement. So this is what I've tried to cover, different ways that we can work together. Like I said, there's no recipe. There is literature on this, like Chris Huxham, Huxham is kind of like the person that I know that has done a lot of academic research on inter-organisational collaboration. I sort of knew her 20 years ago, so I'm assuming there might be more recent literature. But I sort of dug around and didn't find anything, but ChatGPT will tell you, I'm sure, if you say what's more recent than Chris Huxham. I think things I'd like to leave you with is collaboration or working together doesn't necessarily mean a memorandum of understanding and signing something and agreeing a strategy. It can be knowing what's going on and kind of just making sure that you're symbiotic with other organisations. And I just say when I worked, my first proper job was British Airways, and on my first day there was like 30 of us, and the chief exec came at 9:30 to welcome us. And the first thing he said, I was a mathematician at the time, the first thing he said was, the competition is not Lufthansa. And I want you all to really understand that. And I was just like, what is he on about? He's like, these crazy marketing people. And then he explains, oh no, it got worse, He says that the competition is Mars bar. And left that with us for a while. He was a very good speaker. And he said, basically, we're chasing disposable income. Lufthansa is chasing disposable income. Mars bar is chasing disposable income. Like, what we're up against is people have got money in their pockets, it's limited. We want them to spend it on the travel industry. And so, like, Lufthansa, we are working with Lufthansa to build the amount of money that people spend on travel. And then we're fighting for our slice of the pie. So we've got the same dynamic, I think, in our movement. We need to grow the movement, grow the resources, and then fight for our slice of the pie. And the last thing I'll say, on the last but one, is, like, don't choose on the back of tactics. And identity, I'm not sure if this is going to land, but identity is not a component of who we work with. So, like, if somebody looks like a scraggy, anarchist, direct action person, that's not an indicator of whether you as the chief exec of, I don't know, Compassionate World Farmer might work with them. You might well be able to work with them. It might be a bit uncomfortable, but it's like, you know, do you share a milestone? That's the kind of criteria on which to judge whether you can collaborate or not how people look like or the cultural aspects of them. And so, yeah, the real last thing I'll say is, like, if we don't collaborate more, then we're not going to help my sister manage her sense of overwhelm of what is she supposed to do, and neither are we going to help Adrian in the Houses of Parliament. So, yeah, thanks for that.